I think the most useful thing that I could do was maybe to see if somebody could turn up the air conditioning. So I don't know if there's anybody from the management here in the back of the room, but maybe that would be useful. I wonder whom this building belongs to. I would like to, I want to take a few minutes to really try, it's a very difficult task to try to give a perspective. Even though we're talking about 20% of world Jewry, we're really talking about very, very different and very disparate realities. And as we, of course, know, and there's so many of you represented in this room, Jews who have migrated or have been hundreds of years in some of these communities have become part of the fabric in which the communities in which they live. And so Jewish life has to be seen both within the context of forces shaping world Jewry, but also within the context of forces that shape each one of these different societies and each one of these different communities. I want to try to argue that there are two intersecting axes around which I would like to organize my comments that relate to the 20% of Jews who are not living either in North America, and I include Canada there, or who are living in Israel. I think if you look over the last 120 years broadly, and I'm taking 1897, the Zionist Congress as the kind of marking point, I think that you have the two largest Jewish communities of the world, of North America and of Israel. You have essentially two great stories of Jewish life of this modern period. You have the story of the creation of the State of Israel as a home and a homeland for the Jewish people. And you have in North America, I think, a great story. This is not our topic today, but you have a great story of the success of Jews feeling at home, and of North America, particularly the United States, but also Canada, becoming a place in which Jews can be whatever they want, and Jews have succeeded in these societies beyond the dreams of their grandfathers and great-grandfathers who emigrated from the shores of Europe in the second half, mainly in the second half of the 19th century. So you have these two very, very huge concentrations of Jews, one which is a homeland, and I'm not going to talk about Israel, and one is a place in which Jews feel preeminently at home. And I think that if one looks at the rest of world Jewry, the 20% who are the subject of our discussion, I think that we see two axes. There's the question of, to how much do Jews today in these societies that we've heard about, and some which have not been described today, but in these clusters of communities, how much are Jews feeling at home? That's the one axis. And the other axis is the role of Israel in the consciousness and in the lives of the Jewish communities that are part of the 20% of contemporary world Jewry. I think we're talking about Latin America that we've heard about from Judith, Europe, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia that I'm lumping together, even though I think that they probably don't deserve to be lumped together. Depends from how far from the periscope you're looking. And I think it was very interesting to me that Sasha Levin spoke not about Jews of the former Soviet Union, but about Russian-speaking Jews. And I wanted to make the same point because I think that we have a phenomenon in Jewish life within the 20%, which are Russian-speaking Jews worldwide. And it's clear, I think, that in the South Africa that I grew up in, and I think there's still the South Africa today, and their leaders of the community are sitting here, and I've been gone for 46 years. But in the South Africa in which I grew up in, Jews did not feel at home. Jews felt as a minority, enfranchised minority, empowered minority, but very much a clear minority in a broader society that was very, very difficult to feel at home in. And I think that there are parts of Latin America where this has been true for the Jewish experience as well. And I think that this created a set of circumstances that affected profoundly these communities. Australia has to be added to this because of the unique post-Holocaust character of Australian society that we heard from so clearly from Philip. And for that reason, I think, the creation of Jewish day schools and the internal institutions of the community, and particularly the creation to Israel, and particularly the fact that these communities grew up historically at the exact time that the Zionist movement was developing, made it natural for these communities to see Israel as a core anchor of Jewish life. And I think it's not by chance that the kind of description of Australian Jewish community, which in many ways is mirrored by the South African Jewish community, you have communities that, for whom, borrowing a phrase of John Wucho, who talked about the UJA as the civil religion, his book was called Civil Religion. In many ways, Israel became the civil religion for so many of these communities. Not only Australia and South Africa, but I think that the shaping of the Jewish communities and polities of Latin America was tied to the emergence of Zionism, the creation of the State of Israel, the Hebrew language, the day school movement, the deep connection to Israel has been at the heart of these communities. I think that the interesting phenomenon, two interesting phenomena of the last 10 to 15 years has been, one, what has happened in Europe. And the experts in this room, both on this days and here below, who are much greater experts in Europe than I am. But I do believe that one of the things that we see in Europe over these last couple of decades is the emergence of a new reality in which Jews feel less and less at home in Europe than they did before. I think that Dr. Dov Maimon of the JPPI shared with me recently something that has not yet been published, but the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union is going to publish in a couple of months a survey that deals with anti-Semitism, where they report that more than 1 in 4, 26% of Jewish respondents in Europe, claim to have experienced anti-Semitic harassment at least once in the 12 months preceding the survey. And 1 in 3 had experienced anti-Semitic harassment over the past 5 years. In 3 of the 9 states surveyed, Belgium, France, and Hungary, between 40 and 50 of respondents said they'd considered emigrating from their country of residence because they didn't feel safe there. So I believe that, and we heard it from Pierre, good and not good. We know that since 1990, 50,000 French Jews have made Aliyah to Israel. And we believe that between 20 and 30,000 French Jews actually live in Israel without having taken citizenship, without having to deal with the bureaucracy of taking citizenship in Israel, and Pierre spoke about it. But in fact, that swells the number to more than 10%, 12% of French Jewry since 1990 has actually decided to make their life in Israel. So I think that if we look at these communities, we see on this axis of feeling at home and not feeling at home a shake-up. If we speak about Russian-speaking Jews throughout the world, the story of Russian-speaking Jews re-engaging with Jewish life after 70 years of communism, Israel is at the heart of this. In some ways, the connection to Israel is a new denomination of Jewish life for people who never were connected to the synagogue because of all of those years of communism. The first-order relatives that we heard about from Sasha, the fact that first-order relatives living in Israel, the fact that we see that in the former Soviet Union, more and more people are going to Ulpanim to learn Hebrew, even if the Aliyah is tailing off. So I believe that we see here a pattern that is very interesting in terms of the engagement of Israel. I believe that this requires Israel to take much more seriously its engagement with the 20%. I don't think that this is only about Aliyah. I believe that over time, many of the smaller communities may drift either towards the larger communities, or that we will see high rates of Aliyah. On the 26th of May at an Aliyah fair in Paris, there were over 5,000 people who came to express interest in coming on Aliyah. But we should understand that we are talking about a world that is becoming more secular. We have a very deep engagement with Israel. There may be over 250,000 French Jews who come to Israel every summer and fill the beaches from Rosh Pinah all the way down to Eilat. But there's also a process of secularization and distancing and intermarriage, and many young Jews for whom the engagement with Israel is not sophisticated enough, it's not complex enough, it's not nuanced enough, and we are facing a polarization of where on the one hand we have people who feel less at home and yet are for whom Israel is not so easy to engage with. I think we've seen in the last decade a major change in the paradigm of the government of Israel. It started with birthright, Massa. We're now at a place where with Bac Blanc that actually Pierre started, every single day school child in France comes to Israel before the end of their Jewish day school experience, and exists in Australia, and exists in South Africa, and exists in Mexico in various different kinds of forms. It exists throughout many of the countries that we're talking about. But I think that we need to start thinking about how the conversation between Israel and these communities becomes a much more complex and nuanced conversation. The government of Israel, I think, is on the threshold of deciding to double its investment in world Jewry and the future of world Jewry, from 400 million shekel in the government's budget, spread through many different kinds of initiatives, to close to 1 billion shekel. And I think we need together to think about how do we engage with the Jewish campus in these countries. The Jewish campus has become, for many young Jews, the battlefield, and Israel, while Israel may be the civil religion, Israel is also a place that makes Jewish students feel uncomfortable, and this is difficult to deal with. We need to think about what does it mean to Israel to engage in a sophisticated way with the different institutions of the community. We need to think about what does it mean to actually get to a stage where every young Jew comes to Israel before the end of high school and then has an opportunity to come back on a longer trip, to come back on Massa. We have 1,000 Jews from the former Soviet Union who now come to Israel on Massa every year. When Massa was started 8 years ago, there was not one single Russian-speaking Jew who came on a two-way ticket. This is a part of the way to think about how Israel can engage in a much more sophisticated way with these communities, because if Israel is the civil religion, we have to think about how Israel is responsible not only for engaging with the ones who want to be drawn closer, but also for the people who are distancing from Israel. Thank you.